morning, everyone. We are here for our final week before we take a break for until September, but there's a number of substantial issues we're still working our way through. Welcome. First item I'll bring to your attention, I think you're all aware, but Catherine Leggett and I have sent a letter to the President of the Board of Education and the Vice President of the Board of Education proposing that they consider naming the high school that will reopen where the Woodward High School was, where Tilden Middle is now. It's presently called Tilden Middle at Charles W. Woodward. For one of the county's great unsung heroes, a man named Josiah Henson, who lived there in that neighborhood, who walked up and down Old Georgetown Road in the business of the farm or plantation where he was enslaved, and who escaped to freedom and had the courage to write his story, to be an abolitionist and a crusader. And by writing his autobiography, he helped bring about an end to slavery through his contributions to the abolitionist movement. And there is a very interesting documentary and a new book coming out called, I'm not sure if I can remember the name of the book, but it's an author named Jared Brock, and he'll be on hand at the documentary release on August 10th. And there'll be some dialogue, and actually a number of members of the Henson family will be at the documentary on August 10th. So I urge you to check that out. Should be very interesting. But again, this will be a high school that will be reopening sometime in the next couple of years, and we're hoping that the school system will consider that very appropriate naming action. And the documentary that will be shown was produced by Jared Brock, the author of the new book, which I just had delivered to my house yesterday and haven't had a chance to get more than a few pages into, but I'm sure it's going to be a great read. Next item, tomorrow the County Council will be taking up the legislation with in relation to moderate priced dwelling units, and there are two significant bills that have worked their way through the committee and will now be for full council consideration and voting. The first we talked about at length last week, which was a legislation introduced by Nancy Florine that makes a number of adjustments to different provisions of the MPDU ordinance to be clearer about what we're trying to accomplish, to provide tools to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs to negotiate more effectively with developers, to charge a housing fee, an MPDU fee for developments that have fewer than 20, but 11 or more units. Presently, they're not charged unless it's 20 or more. So there's a number of provisions in there that are kind of modernizing the ordinance. We discussed that at length last week, and we'll be voting on it tomorrow. And we'll also be discussing and voting on a separate bill that I introduced that has a significant change in the requirement for MPDUs in different parts of the county where the average income of that community is quite high. So the legislation, as it will be before the council, says that when a development is in an area where the median income is 145% of the county median or higher, that it must be a 15% MPDU requirement in that building or that development. And what this kind of does is finish the job in a lot of ways that we have been undertaking through a series of master plans. We made 15% the requirement in Westbard initially, and then Bethesda, and then Rock Spring, and then Grosvenor, and then White Flint 2. And this will enable us to make 15% the requirement in communities that are similar, like Friendship Heights or White Flint 1, without waiting for the master plan to come back before the council, which could be 10 or 20 years. Who knows when those master plans will come back. And also it establishes a countywide law, so it could change with the county as the county changes. And it's an appropriate requirement on new development in communities where the demand is really high, and we feel that the market can really absorb that additional requirement. So the county full council has not had a chance to discuss it, but we'll be taking it up tomorrow. It's a fairly straightforward bill, and so we'll see how that discussion goes. I think you're aware that, moving on, there is a zoning text amendment for the council. We'll have a public hearing in September around accessory dwelling units, and this is a committee zoning text amendment proposal that simply moves approval of a application from the purview of the Board of Appeals to an administrative decision by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. This is to just streamline the process. There haven't been a lot of applications. There haven't been many applicants that have gone to the Board of Appeals, and they've been pretty smooth even when they've gone there. So the committee has felt that really now, with a better understanding of the context, that the decision could appropriately be made by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. I have also asked community members to share additional thoughts that they might have about ways that we could change the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and we'll gather feedback from that and consider whether to make additional changes in this zoning text amendment or whether to proceed separately. But either way, I think the idea that we need more and diverse housing types is something that is gaining support or gaining a foothold in the county, that we have such a crunch in our housing costs, and it's getting more and more difficult for middle-class families to afford living closer to jobs. And so having housing types, whether accessory dwelling units or other types of units, just creates more options and hopefully allows housing to be created at a more affordable price point. So that's just going to be an ongoing topic for us. Last item I'll bring up, the Fed committee today will be again returning, I believe for the final time as a committee, to the zoning change that I've introduced around the making wine and beer and spirits and cider in the agricultural reserve. And the committee discussion has been very helpful, very productive, and there's still some points of disagreement that we're talking through with advocates, and hope to get to a place of common understanding. But we have a lot of interest in creating wineries and farm breweries in the county, and we have a legal environment that is very murky, and there are a lot of advocates urging us to make it much harder to create a farm brewery or to open a winery. We've even received proposals that would prevent those that we have from ever having opened in the first place. So we're going to try to find the right balance here to ensure that this sector can continue to grow, that our ag reserve can continue to thrive, and our residents can have that quality of life offering. So those are the 4 items that I wanted to bring to your attention, and you may have questions of your own.
There's this bill, the telecommunication towers bill, being introduced tomorrow. This is the third bill that has to deal with this issue.
Right.
We passed one already with mixed and commercial.
Correct.
But there's been a lot of public opposition to this in residential areas. So can you explain what's different this time that makes you think you're going to get something through and get passed?
Well, we did not previously bring to a vote, an ordinance affecting the deployment of wireless infrastructure in residential communities. There was legislation that was introduced, quite some time ago, more than a year ago. And we, the sponsor of that bill essentially pulled it back, and we had a lot of community dialogue, and we also engaged in a lot of discussion with the FCC and with state policymakers. And so we came back and considered and passed an ordinance that focused in the areas of greatest demand, we know, the commercial areas, but the job is not done, and we need to resolve the question about the future of this infrastructure in residential communities. And the county executive has put a lot of thought into it. We'll see that ordinance more closely at the council. I really haven't had a chance to go through it yet, but you may have noticed I was at the council last week, at the FCC last week, meeting with Commissioner Brendan Carr. I went with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the NATOA, the Local Government Telecom Group, and the National League of Cities. And we advocated against the preemption of county authority, and we're very concerned that the FCC is moving forward to try to preempt our control over our own roadways and our own decisions of how infrastructure should be sited. And we know that the state legislature will also be back with legislation to preempt local authority over this infrastructure. So I've been saying, and many advocates have been saying as well, that the best offense here is a good defense, that if we want to have the maximum influence over how this infrastructure is deployed, then we need to take action ourselves to establish those rules and those procedures. And so what we'll be getting from the county executive is the executive's proposal over how to do that, and we'll take it up and
go through. Did someone from the FCC tell you that they will preempt the county if you do not pass some type of legislation to facilitate these towers?
Well, no one has been that explicit, but we know that they're looking at preemption. When we met with Commissioner Carr, he was very much seeking, as I said in my own comment on it, a foundation for his proposal. And he's been tasked by Chairman Pai to develop a proposal for the FCC majority on this infrastructure. So we know that that's what they're looking at. Whether he will ultimately recommend that, we don't know. What the commission would do, we don't know. It's unknown. But it is expected. And certainly the legislation that was introduced at the state last year was very clear. It was a significant preemption that would have really been very problematic and left the county with very little control over how any of this infrastructure gets deployed.
You said the first bill that was introduced a year ago, the sponsor withdrew their bill. So you're the sponsor of this bill on behalf of the county executive. Is there any way, if there's enough public pressure, that you would, withdraw this bill? Are you, because last time...
Look, I think we need to take action. I really do. That's my feeling. I think we need to move forward, not only because the technology matters and having this county continue to be at the leading edge of technology is important, but also because if we don't demonstrate that we can handle our business, then the FCC and the state have a very strong argument to take away our control. And we don't want to give them that justification.
Yes.
So I know this morning the Public Safety Committee was briefed on a crime statistics update, and in the document they were highlighting the supplemental funds that were given for gang suppression. They were kind of tying it together that there's been no known gang-related homicides in the year, and they were obviously saying that as a positive thing. Do you think anything you can comment on that matter?
Well, we're working hard. It certainly is good news that there have been no known gang-related homicides in 2018, and we've stepped up our efforts with prosecution and support for the state's attorney to be more aggressive in going after violent gangs. And of course, we're continuing to invest in diversion programs and after-school programs and community policing. So we will it's a major area of concern for this county. There's no question about it, and we're just gonna. It's good that we have not had any bad news. No news is good news yet, but we've got a lot more to do, and we're gonna keep up the hard work. That's for sure.
What do you think of the alternatives for 270 that were released last week? Any thoughts?
Well, we're going to need to go through a council process here. And, you know, the council is on record for an approach, a master plan approach to 270. So I've asked council staff to prepare a letter kind of outlining our existing, adopted plan. And we need to get a better understanding of what the governor is actually talking about. So it's a little, I don't quite understand why the governor's gone to the planning board, to have their public process. Really, the council is the relevant body here. But we need to get our hands on the more detailed plans from the state and take a look at those. So there's still a lot of information to be gathered here. But when we get clearer on what they're looking at, then I think we will consider whether there's any change in the county position that we would need to, discuss. But again, the council has an adopted framework, and that is our position at this time.
What is the county position?
Well, I can get you that master plan. There's a use of reversible lanes, so I'd be happy to get that to you, and you can pour through that.
Okay. Any endorsements for the county executive race?
Have there been any? I don't know.
Do you plan on endorsing?
I'm sitting here as a council president, not engaged in political campaigns, so.
No endorsement?
Offline.
Yeah.
Okay.
The sinkhole in Germantown, that was a county pipe, not a WSSC pipe. At least according to reports.
We'll have to get back to you on that. Sorry, Doug.
About who owned the pipe, I'm not sure.
You guys
Yeah.
are fixing it, fair.
Yeah, we are, yeah. DOT had put something out about it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.